The Grand Theater on Fifth Avenue had seen better days, but tonight, it sparkled like it hadn't in decades. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead, champagne flutes clinked in every corner, and the air hummed with laughter, perfume, and the low thrum of expensive conversation. It was the annual Horizon Gala, a charity event thrown by Eris Thorne, the tech billionaire whose name appeared on everything from electric cars to satellite startups. People came not just to donate but to be seen, and tonight, they were all dressed like they'd stepped out of a magazine. Near the back of the lobby, tucked between a marble pillar and a velvet rope, a man in faded gray work clothes pushed a mop across the polished floor. His name was Cale, and he moved quietly like someone used to being overlooked. His boots were scuffed, his hands rough from years of scrubbing, fixing, and carrying. He kept his head down, not out of shame but habit. In places like this, people like him were part of the scenery, like the potted ferns or the coat check stand. No one spoke to him unless they needed something moved or cleaned. Inside the main hall, the music swelled. A string quartet played something elegant but forgettable. Guests mingled, snapping photos for social media, making deals disguised as small talk. At the center of it all stood Alira Voss, Eris's younger sister. She wore a deep green dress that matched her sharp eyes, and though she smiled easily, there was a playful edge to her that kept people guessing. She wasn't interested in boardrooms or stock prices. She'd studied philosophy, traveled through Southeast Asia on a motorbike, and once spent 3 months living in a lighthouse just to see what silence sounded like. She'd only come tonight because Eris had begged her. "It's for the kids' hospital wing," he'd said. "Just show up, smile, and don't say anything weird." She'd agreed, but only because she missed him, even if he'd become someone she barely recognized. Now, slightly bored and nursing a glass of sparkling water, she didn't drink at these things, too many people watching. Elira wandered into the lobby for air. That's when she saw the piano. It was a restored 1920s Steinway, its black lacquer gleaming under the soft lights. Someone had left sheet music on the stand, Chopin's Etude in C-sharp minor upper 10 No. 4, known among pianists as one of the most technically demanding pieces ever written. Fast, furious, full of emotion and near impossible fingerwork, Alira smirked. She'd dated a concert pianist once. He'd practiced this piece for months and still messed up the middle section. Her eyes drifted to the janitor nearby, quietly wringing out his mop. On a whim, she walked over. "Hey," she said, voice light but loud enough to carry. "You know how to play?" Cale looked up, startled. He wasn't used to being addressed directly, especially not by someone in silk and diamonds. He shook his head slowly. "Not really," he said, voice low and calm. Alira grinned. She pointed to the piano. "Play this and I'll marry you." The words hung in the air for half a second before a few nearby guests burst out laughing. One man nearly choked on his champagne. Another snapped a photo, already imagining the caption. "Billionaire's sister proposes to janitor, plot twist." Eris appeared at her elbow, shaking his head with a tolerant smile. "Alira, please, don't embarrass the staff." "I'm not embarrassing anyone," she said, still smiling. "It's just a joke. Everyone knows you can't just sit down and play Chopin like it's chopsticks." More laughter. Cale didn't react. He just looked at the piano, then back at his bucket. For a moment it seemed he'd walk away, but then he set the mop against the wall. He wiped his hands on his trousers, twice, and walked toward the Steinway like he'd done it 1,000 times before. The crowd, sensing something unexpected, began to gather. Phones came out. Whispers spread. Eris frowned. "This isn't funny, Alira." "I didn't think it would actually happen," she whispered back, suddenly unsure. Cale sat down. He adjusted the bench, flexed his fingers, calloused, strong, but surprisingly graceful, and placed them on the keys. And then he played. From the very first note, the room changed. The chatter died. The clinking glasses stopped. Even the string quartet in the next room seemed to pause, as if listening through the walls. He didn't just play the notes, he lived them. The etude poured out of him like a storm-given sound, fast, yes, but also deeply human. There was grief in the low chords, defiance in the racing runs, and something tender beneath it all, like a memory too precious to name. His body swayed slightly with the music, eyes closed as if he'd forgotten everyone was watching. Alira's smile vanished. Her glass hung forgotten in her hand. Eris stood frozen, his usual confidence replaced by something closer to awe. When the final chord rang out and faded into silence, no one moved. No one breathed, then applause. Not polite clapping, but real thunderous applause. Someone shouted, "Bravo!" A woman wiped her eyes. The string quartet rushed in from the hall, staring at Cale like he'd just performed magic. But Cale didn't bow. He didn't smile or wave. He simply stood, nodded once, almost shyly, and walked back to his mop. He picked it up, dipped it in the bucket, and went back to cleaning the floor as if nothing had happened. The crowd didn't know what to do. Some tried to approach him, ask questions, get his name. He just shook his head and kept working. Elira stood there, heart pounding. She felt foolish, but not because she'd been wrong. She felt foolish because she'd assumed. Assumed he was just a worker. Assumed talent only lived in tuxedos and conservatories. Assumed people like him didn't carry entire worlds inside them. Eris finally spoke, voice quiet. "Who is that?" "No idea," Elira said. "But I think we just met someone who doesn't need our charity. He's got something we don't." Later that night, a blurry video surfaced online. Shot on a phone, shaky with poor lighting, but the audio was clear. The caption read, "Janitor plays Chopin like a ghost from the past." Billionaire crowd left speechless. By morning, it had 500,000 views. Cale, meanwhile, clocked out at 2 a.m., walked 10 blocks to his tiny apartment above a laundromat, and sat on the edge of his bed. He didn't check his phone. He didn't know he was famous. He just stared at his hands, the same hands that scrubbed floors, fixed leaky faucets, and now, for one brief moment, had spoken in a language everyone understood. He thought about his sister. How she used to sit on the piano bench beside him when they were kids, humming along as he practiced. How she'd said, "One day the whole world will hear you." He hadn't believed her then. And now, after all these years of silence, a room full of strangers had heard him, but not really him. Just the music. He didn't know it yet, but his quiet life was about to change, not because of a joke or a viral video, or even a billionaire's curiosity, but because sometimes when you've carried something beautiful for so long in silence, the world finally leans in to listen. And when it does, you can't just go back to mopping floors like nothing happened. The next morning, the city woke up to a mystery. Who was the man in the gray uniform who played Chopin like he'd been born inside the piano? News outlets scrambled for answers. Social media buzzed with theories. Was he a former prodigy? A retired concert artist slumming it for fun? A ghost? One tabloid even claimed he was a Russian spy using music as a secret code. But in a small apartment above a laundromat, Kyle knew nothing about any of it. He made coffee in a dented pot, fed his neighbor's cat while they were away, and walked to the theater early as usual. He didn't own a smartphone, just an old flip phone for emergencies, so the digital storm swirling around him might as well have been happening on another planet. That changed the moment he stepped through the theater's service entrance. Instead of the usual quiet hum of pre-event cleaning, the hallway was packed with people, cameras, microphones, bright lights. A young reporter spotted him instantly. "Cale, over here! Can you tell us how you learned to play like that?" Cale froze. "How do you know my name?" "We found your employee file," someone else called out. "You've worked here for 8 months. He blinked, overwhelmed. He wasn't used to attention, especially not this kind. He mumbled something about needing to finish his rounds and tried to slip past, but the crowd followed. Inside the main lobby, Eris and Elira were already waiting. They'd arrived before sunrise, both unable to sleep. Elira looked tired but wired, eyes bright with questions. Eris, usually composed, kept checking his phone, frowning at the flood of messages from investors, journalists, even his mother. "There he is," Elira said softly when she saw Cale. Eris stepped forward. "We didn't mean for this to happen," he said, voice uncharacteristically gentle. "But now that it has, we'd like to help." Kyle looked from Eris to Elira, then at the sea of strangers behind them. "Help with what?" "Your music," Elira said. "People want to hear more. You could perform. Record an album, tour." Cale shook his head. "I'm not a performer." "But you are," Elira insisted. "Last night wasn't an accident. That was skill. That was soul." He didn't answer right away. He glanced at the grand piano, still sitting in the same spot. Then he said, "I just play when no one's watching. It's different when people stare." Eris exchanged a look with his sister. This wasn't the reaction they'd expected. Most people would have jumped at the chance, fame, money, a way out. But Cale didn't seem to want any of it. Later that day, a music professor from the local conservatory showed up. Dr. Lin had seen the video and recognized Cale's technique immediately. "That fingering in the third passage, it's identical to Renner's method," she told Eris privately. Cale Renner disappeared from the Vienna scene 20 years ago. He was supposed to be the next big thing. Eris's eyes widened. "You're saying he's that Renner? I'd bet my tenure on it." Meanwhile, Cale finished his shift in silence, ignoring the whispers and stares. But as he locked up the theater that evening, Alira was waiting by the back door. "I'm sorry about this morning," she said. "I didn't think it would blow up like this," Cale shrugged. "It's not your fault. Still," she said, "I owe you an apology. I made a joke and it turned your life upside down." He looked at her for a long moment. Then quietly, "You didn't turn it upside down, you just shined a light on something I'd buried." They stood in the cool evening air, the city humming around them. "Why'd you stop playing?" she asked gently. Kyle hesitated. He wasn't one for sharing, but something in her eyes, no pity, just curiosity, made him speak. "My sister got sick," he said. "Real sick. We didn't have insurance. I was in Vienna, studying, getting ready for my debut. But she needed help. So I came home, sold my piano, took whatever jobs I could find." Alira didn't say anything. She just listened. "She passed 5 years ago," he added. "After that, I didn't see the point in playing for crowds. Music became private, like a letter I wrote to her every night." Alira's throat tightened. "I'm so sorry," he nodded. "It's okay. Grief doesn't disappear. You just learn to carry it differently." Back at the Thorne estate, Eris couldn't stop thinking about what Dr. Lin had said. He dug deeper, pulling old concert programs, archived reviews. One headline from 2004 read, "Renner stuns Vienna with debut. Critics call him the Quiet Thunder." There was a photo. Cale, much younger, standing beside a piano, eyes serious, hair longer. The same hands. The same stillness. Eris felt a strange mix of guilt and admiration. This man had given up everything. Not for fame, not for money, but for love. And now, because of a careless joke, the world wanted to turn his pain into entertainment. The next day, Alira returned to the theater, not as a billionaire's sister, but as herself. She brought sheet music, not Chopin this time, but simpler pieces, Debussy, Satie, even a folk tune from the mountains where she'd once hiked. "I thought you might like these," she said, handing them to Cale during his break. "No pressure, just if you ever want to play something gentle." He took the pages, surprised. "Why are you being so kind?" "Because I was careless," she said. "And because I think you deserve to be heard. Not as a spectacle, but as a person." That night, after everyone left, Cale sat at the piano again. Not for an audience. Not for a video. Just for himself. He played one of the pieces Alira had brought. A quiet, flowing melody that reminded him of rain on rooftops. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like a goodbye. It felt like a hello. Outside, unnoticed, Alira stood in the shadows of the lobby listening. She didn't record it. Didn't tell anyone. She just let the music wash over her, simple and true. By week's end, offers poured in. TV appearances, record deals, even a film option. But Cale turned them all down. "I'm not a story," he told Eris firmly. "I'm a person who plays piano." Eris, to his credit, didn't push. Instead, he asked, "What do you want?" Cale thought for a long time. Then he said, "I want kids who can't afford lessons to have a chance. I want broken pianos fixed in schools that lost their arts programs. I want music to be something people live, not just consume." Eris nodded slowly. "Then let's make that happen." And just like that, the noise began to fade. The cameras moved on to the next viral moment. But something quieter, stronger had taken root, not in headlines, but in choices. In apologies. In a shared belief that talent isn't about where you've been, but what you're willing to give back. Cale still wore his gray uniform. Still mopped floors. But now sometimes he'd pause by the piano, place his hands on the keys, and play a few notes, just enough to remind himself that beauty doesn't need an audience to exist. It just needs someone brave enough to let it out. Kyle didn't talk about his past. Not because he was hiding it, but because it hurt too much to unpack. But memories don't stay buried just because you stop digging. They rise on their own, especially when the world starts knocking on your door. It began with a knock at the theater's back entrance one rainy Tuesday afternoon. An elderly woman stood there holding a worn leather portfolio. Her name was Professor Mira Lynn, the same one who'd recognized his playing. She didn't come with cameras or questions, just a quiet request. "May I speak with you?" "In private?" Cale hesitated, then let her in. They sat in the dimly lit green room, far from the grand lobby where the only sounds were the drip of rain on the roof and the distant hum of the city. "I taught at Vienna," she said gently. "You were in my masterclass in 2003, do you remember?" Cale looked down at his hands. "I remember. You disappeared right before your debut recital, no note. No explanation, just gone." Her voice wasn't accusing, just sad. "We all wondered what happened." He took a slow breath. "My sister Leora was diagnosed with a rare kidney disease. She was 17. Our parents were gone by then. Car accident when I was 12, so it was just us. I wired her money every month from my scholarship, but it wasn't enough. The treatments cost more than I could imagine. One night she called me crying, said the hospital was threatening to stop care unless we paid." He paused. The memory still felt raw, like a bruise pressed too hard. "I sold everything. My piano, my concert clothes. Even the bow tie my professor gave me for luck. Bought a one-way ticket home. Told no one. I thought I'd go back after she got better. But she didn't," Professor Lynn said softly. Cale shook his head. "She held on for 3 years. Fought like hell, but the system failed her. No insurance, no safety net, just bills piling up like snow." After Leora passed, Cale tried to return to music. He sat at borrowed pianos, but his fingers felt stiff, his heart empty. The notes sounded hollow. He'd stare at the keys and hear her voice instead. "Play something happy today, Cale." But he couldn't, not when happiness felt like betrayal. So he stopped. Took a job fixing pipes, then cleaning offices, then maintaining theaters. Any place that had a piano he could play late at night when no one was around. Music became his secret language with Leora, not something to share with strangers. Professor Lynn reached into her portfolio and pulled out a faded program. "Your final performance at the conservatory," she said, handing it to him. "You played Liszt's Consolation No. 3. The whole room cried. Even the critics." Cale stared at the paper. His younger self smiled back from a tiny black and white photo. He barely recognized that boy, so sure, so full of dreams. "I'm not him anymore," he said. "No," she agreed. "But you're still you, and the world needs to hear what you carry." That conversation stayed with him, not because it changed his mind overnight, but because it reminded him that someone had seen him, really seen him, long before the gala, long before the video. Meanwhile, Illyra couldn't stop thinking about what Cale had told her. She started visiting public schools in the city's underserved neighborhoods. What she found broke her heart. Music rooms turned into storage closets, broken instruments gathering dust, kids who'd never touched a piano. One boy told her, "My teacher said art is a luxury. We gotta focus on math." She came home that night and confronted Eris. "We fund space stations and AI startups, but we let kids grow up never hearing a live violin? That's not progress. That's loss." Eris, usually quick with a counter-argument, stayed quiet. He remembered his own childhood. Piano lessons every Wednesday, his mother humming as she cooked, the way music filled their house like sunlight. He'd taken it for granted. "What do you want to do?" he finally asked. "Start small," Illyra said. "Fix pianos in 5 schools. Hire teachers who actually care. Give kids like Leora a fighting chance." Eris nodded. "Then we'll do it." In her name, they called it the Leora Project. No press release. No fanfare. Just action. Cale heard about it from a custodian at Jefferson High, where the first piano was being restored. "Some rich folks are paying to fix this old thing," the man said, wiping dust off the keys. "Said it's for a girl who loved music." Kyle went to see it himself. The piano was old, out of tune, missing 2 keys, but someone had already started repairing it. New felt on the hammers, fresh strings, a handwritten note taped to the lid, for Leora, and all the voices waiting to be heard. He sat down and played a simple scale. The sound was rough, uneven, but alive. That night he dreamed of his sister. She was sitting on a sunlit bench, smiling. "You kept your promise," she said. "You never stopped playing." When he woke up, he knew what he had to do. He called Elira. "I'll help," he said. "Not on stage, but in the classrooms. If kids are going to learn, they need someone who knows what it's like to start with nothing." Elira didn't gush. She just said, "Thank you. We start Monday." And so Cale Renner, the man the internet called the janitor pianist, walked into Jefferson High not as a celebrity, but as Mr. Renner, the new music mentor. The kids eyed him skeptically at first. He didn't wear fancy clothes, didn't talk big, but when he sat at the repaired piano and played a blues riff that made the whole room tap their feet, they leaned in. One girl, shy and quiet, stayed after class. "Can you show me how to play that part?" she asked. He smiled. "Sure, but first tell me why you want to learn." She looked down. "My brother's in the hospital. He says music makes the pain quieter." Kyle's chest tightened. He nodded. "Then let's make some quiet together." Word spread. More kids signed up. Not because they wanted fame, but because, for the first time, music felt like a friend, not a test. Back at the theater, Cale still cleaned. Still mopped. But now sometimes students would come by after school to practice on the grand piano while he worked nearby. He'd listen, offer a tip, or just smile when they finally nailed a tough passage. He wasn't trying to rebuild his old life. He was building something new, something that honored Leora not with sorrow but with action. And in those classrooms, in the quiet moments between notes, Cale began to heal. Not all at once, not completely, but enough to believe that music wasn't just for the gifted or the wealthy. It was for anyone brave enough to press a key and say, "I'm here." The world had tried to turn his story into a fairy tale. Janitor becomes star, billionaire falls for him, happy ending. But real life wasn't like that. Real life was messy, slow, and full of second chances that didn't come with spotlights. It came in the form of a repaired piano, a student's first chord, a promise kept across time, and sometimes that was more than enough. Eris hadn't slept well in weeks. It wasn't the stress of board meetings or market dips, it was something quieter, heavier. He kept replaying that night at the gala, the way Cale had played like his hands held a lifetime of unsaid things. And now, watching the Leora project grow from a handful of classrooms into something real, Eris felt a strange mix of pride and shame. Pride because it was working. Shame because it had taken a viral video for him to notice what was right in front of him all along. One afternoon, he found Cale in the theater's basement, tightening a loose pedal on an old upright piano they'd rescued from a closed school. Dust floated in the slanted light from a high window. The air smelled of wood polish and old paper. "I've been thinking," Eris said, leaning against the doorframe. "We should do something bigger." Cale didn't look up. "Bigger than giving kids instruments and teachers?" "Not bigger in scale," Eris clarified. "Bigger in meaning. Something that ties it all together." Kyle wiped his hands on a rag. "Like what?" "The city's tech symposium is next month. Huge event. Global press, investors, artists. They always do some flashy performance. What if you played? Not as a gimmick. Not as the janitor, just as Cale Renner, musician." Cale went still. "I told you, I don't perform. This wouldn't be like the gala," Eris insisted. "No jokes. No cameras shoved in your face. Just a stage, a piano, and people who actually care about sound." And he hesitated. "We'd announced the Leora Foundation that night, fully funded with scholarships, instrument repairs, after-school programs nationwide." Kyle looked at him, really looked. "You'd do that? No strings?" "No strings," Eris said. "Except one condition." Kyle raised an eyebrow. "You play something new. Not Chopin, not Liszt, something yours, something that tells your truth." That hit harder than Eris expected. Kyle turned away, staring at the piano keys like they held answers. He hadn't written music in over a decade. After Leora died, every melody felt like a ghost, but lately, in the quiet hours after teaching, he'd started sketching little phrases in a notebook, fragments of sound that reminded him of rain on hospital windows, of her laugh, of the way silence could be both empty and full. "I'd need time," he said finally. 6 weeks, Eris replied. "And a proper piano. Not this one." He nodded at the battered upright. Kyle almost smiled. "I've played worse." Still, he didn't say yes. Not yet. Over the next few days, he watched his students, saw how they lit up when they finally played a song without mistakes, How one boy who barely spoke in class hummed melodies while sharpening pencils. How a girl with braces and nervous hands played a simple scale over and over until it sounded like hope. They weren't chasing fame. They were chasing joy, and maybe, just maybe, he could do the same. He went to Elira that evening. She was in the community center they'd turned into a music hub, tuning a violin for a shy 10-year-old. "Your brother asked me to play at the symposium," he said when she was done. She set the violin down carefully. "And? I'm scared," he admitted. "What if I freeze? What if it's not good enough?" Elira didn't offer empty comfort. "It won't be perfect, and that's okay. Music isn't about perfection. It's about honesty. If you play like you mean it, people will feel it, even if they don't understand why." He nodded slowly. "I've been writing something. Just bits and pieces. Then finish it," she said. "Not for them. For Leora. For you." That night, Kyle sat at the grand piano in the empty theater. No audience. No expectations. Just him, the keys, and the notebook filled with scribbled notes and smudged pencil lines. He began to play. At first, it was hesitant. Fragments stitched together like old photographs. But as the hours passed, the pieces found each other. A low, mournful bass line for the years of silence. A rising melody for the kids who now dared to dream. A sudden burst of rhythm for the stubborn joy that kept him going. And underneath it all, a quiet, repeating phrase. Leora's favorite lullaby, the one he used to hum when she couldn't sleep. By dawn, he had it. Not a classical masterpiece. Not a showy display. Just a song called Still Here. He called Eris. "I'll do it." The weeks that followed were a blur of rehearsals, meetings, and late nights. Eris kept his word, no press, no hype. Just a simple announcement, a special performance by Cale Renner in support of the Leora Foundation for Youth Music Access. Some critics scoffed. "Another viral stunt," one wrote. "Can't they leave the man alone?" But others remembered the video, remembered the silence that followed those final notes. They waited. Back in the classrooms, Cale kept teaching. He didn't tell the kids about the performance. But one afternoon, the girl with braces asked, "Mr. Renner, are you going to play somewhere soon?" He paused. "How'd you know?" "My mom saw it online," she said. "It's a big deal." "It's just music," he said. "But you're in it," she replied. "That makes it special." The night of the symposium arrived. The venue was sleek and modern. Glass walls, floating lights, a stage that looked like it belonged in a spaceship. Backstage, Cale wore simple black trousers and a soft cotton shirt, no tie, no shine. He ran his fingers over the keys of the concert grand they'd brought in. Perfectly tuned, responsive, alive. Eris found him 10 minutes before showtime. "Nervous?" "A little." "Good," Eris said. "Means you care." Then quietly, "Thank you." For saying yes. Cale looked at him. "Thank you. For listening." When his name was called, the applause was polite. Curious, not certain. He walked on stage without fanfare, sat down, took a breath and played Still Here. It wasn't flashy. It didn't have thunderous chords or impossible runs. But it had truth. In the pauses between notes, you could hear loss. In the rising phrases, resilience. In the gentle ending, peace. Halfway through, someone in the front row began to cry. Not dramatically, just a quiet tear wiped away fast. Others leaned forward as if drawn by something they couldn't name. When he finished, there was no immediate applause. Just silence. The kind that comes when something real has happened. Then, slowly at first, then all at once, the room rose to its feet. Backstage, Elira wiped her eyes. Eris stood still, jaw tight, realizing for the first time that real impact wasn't measured in downloads or dollars, but in the space between one heart and another. Later, at the foundation launch, Cale didn't give a speech. He just stood beside Eris and Elira as they announced the first wave of grants. 50 schools, 200 instruments, 50 new teaching positions. A reporter asked him, "Do you feel vindicated?" "After all these years?" Kyle shook his head. "I don't need vindication. I just needed to remember why I started." And as he walked out into the cool night air, not as a janitor, not as a star, but simply as himself, he knew one thing for sure. He was still here, and so was the music. The symposium performance didn't make Cale famous, not in the way the internet usually measures fame. There were no billboards, no late-night talk show invites, no perfume deals. But something deeper happened. People started listening differently. Not to the story of a janitor who could play piano, but to the music itself and to the quiet truth behind it. A few weeks later, Cale stood in a sunlit classroom at Jefferson High, watching a group of students rehearse a simple duet. One boy kept missing his cue, but his partner didn't sigh or roll her eyes. She just smiled and said, "Try again. I'll wait." That small moment, kindness wrapped in patience, meant more to Cale than any standing ovation. He still cleaned the theater on weekends, still wore his gray uniform. But now, when he passed the grand piano in the lobby, he sometimes stopped, played a few notes, and left without fanfare. No one filmed it. No one turned it into a meme. It was just music doing what it was meant to do, existing, connecting, healing. Lyra visited the schools often, not as a donor, but as a helper. She'd sit in the back of classrooms, take notes, ask teachers what they really needed. She learned how to restring a guitar, how to tune a xylophone, even how to calm a nervous first grader before their first recital. She stopped wearing designer clothes to these visits, started wearing jeans and sneakers instead. "Less distraction," she told Cale once. "I want them to see me as a person, not a price tag." Eris, meanwhile, changed too. He began sitting in on Leora Foundation board meetings, not to lead, but to listen. He funded a mobile music van that traveled to rural towns where schools had no arts programs. He didn't put his name on it, just a small plaque that read, "For Leora, and every child who deserves to be heard." One afternoon, he found Cale in the theater's storage room, repairing an old metronome. "You know," Eris said, leaning against a stack of sheet music, "I used to think success was about building something that lasted forever. Now I think it's about building something that matters today." Cale looked up, screwdriver in hand. "That's a good thought." "It came from watching you," Eris admitted. "You didn't wait for permission to make a difference. You just did it, with a mop in one hand and music in the other." Cale smiled faintly. Music was never the gift. It was the bridge. Months passed. The Leora Foundation grew, not explosively but steadily, like a tree putting down roots. More schools joined. More kids picked up instruments. Some would never become professionals, and that was fine. They weren't learning to impress. They were learning to express. Then came the spring recital at Jefferson High. Not a fancy event, just folding chairs in the gym, parents holding phones, kids in slightly wrinkled clothes. Cale sat in the third row, hands folded, heart full. One by one, students performed. A shy boy played Ode to Joy with careful fingers. A group of girls sang a folk song in three-part harmony. And then the girl with braces, the one who'd asked about his performance, stepped up to the keyboard. She played a short piece she'd written herself. It wasn't perfect. She missed a note near the end, but she didn't stop. She kept going, eyes fixed on the keys, chin lifted. When she finished, the room erupted in cheers, not polite applause, but real, joyful noise. Afterward, she ran to Cale. "Did you hear it? I wrote it for my brother. He's out of the hospital now." Kyle hugged her gently. "He's lucky to have you." "No," she said, grinning. "I'm lucky to have you." That night, Kyle walked home under a sky full of stars. The city was loud, as always, but inside him was a quiet kind of peace. He thought about Leora, wondered if she could see this, the classrooms, the kids, the music living on in ways she never got to experience. He stopped at the laundromat below his apartment, checked the machines like he always did for his elderly neighbor, then climbed the stairs. In his small living room, he opened a drawer and pulled out a photo. Him and Leora standing in front of their old house, both smiling like the future was wide open. He didn't cry. Not anymore. But he held the photo a little longer than usual. The next morning, he received a letter. Not an email. Real paper, handwritten. It was from a music teacher in a small town 3 states away. Her school had just received a donated piano through the Leora Foundation. "The kids call it Leora's piano," she wrote. "They take turns playing it during lunch." One boy said it sounds like hope. "I think he's right." Cale read it twice. Then he tucked it into his notebook, right beside his sketches of new melodies. He never married Lyra. That joke from the gala night stayed just that. A joke, turned tender by time. But they became something rarer, true friends. They met for coffee every few weeks, talked about everything and nothing, and never once mentioned the video that started it all. Eris, for his part, stepped back from the spotlight. He still ran his company, but he made space for things that couldn't be measured in profit. like the sound of a child's first chord, or the quiet pride in a teacher's eyes when a student finally gets it. Years later, someone would ask Kyle if he regretted walking away from a concert career. He'd just shake his head and say, "I didn't walk away. I came home." Because in the end, it was never about stages or spotlights. It was about showing up, day after day, with kindness, with patience, with the courage to share something beautiful even when no one's watching. And sometimes, when the world leans in anyway, you don't have to become someone else. You just keep being who you've always been, someone who believes music isn't for the few, but for everyone who's willing to listen. On a quiet Tuesday evening, long after the gala, the headlines, and the symposium, Kyle sat at a piano in a community center, teaching a group of kids how to play a simple blues progression. Outside, the city buzzed on, unaware of the small miracle happening inside. A room full of ordinary people, making something extraordinary together, one note at a time, and that, more than anything, was the real ending, not with a grand finale, but with a shared song that never really ends,